Welcome back to the 5280 pitch, women's soccer at altitude. I'm your host, Kate Hansen, and today we're actually not going to be talking about goals or formations or player profiles. No, today is about a moment in time that is bigger than a single match, bigger than a winning streak, and bigger than any individual player. This is about the city of Denver making a historic move that could reshape not just the Denver skyline, but the soul of our community and the future of women's professional sports here in the Mile High City. Picture this, a long vacant industrial site, the old Gates Rubber Company factory. For those of you that are Denver natives like yours truly, I remember driving by that as a kid all the time and seeing all of the broken windows. And it's funny because once they leveled the old Gates Rubber factory, I think we all were excited about what could potentially be there. Now, again, for those of you that are familiar with Denver, there was a lot of toxins in the area, and so it took a while for the area to be clear of the toxins so that they could build on the old Gates Rubber factory lot, which is now known as Santa Fe Yards. It has been sitting there for decades in the Baker neighborhood, unused, underinvested, waiting for a purpose. Once just rusted memories and asphalt, this 6-acre plot is now on the brink of becoming a site for a soaring 14,500 seat stadium built specifically for the National Women's Soccer League newest franchise. We're talking about the Denver Summit. And I think this is very significant, not just for the club or for the league, but for Denver itself, a city that for too long hasn't had a dedicated home for top-level women's sports. So it was just recently on a very chilly night here in December, one of the only chilly nights here in December, because 2025 December has been anything but chilly. But it was a chilly December night. Denver City Council meeting was packed with Summit supporters, neighbors, residents of the Santa Fe Yards area. Voices were heard, people, and not just from soccer fans, but from local business owners, community organizers, and everyday citizens. Dozens spoke in favor of rezoning and funding measures that will unlock the potential of this land, flipping it from a giant empty lot to electric with life and possibility. Their message wasn't just, we want a stadium. It was, we want a community, a destination, a place where future memories will be made. And the rezoning request, it was delayed a week for alignment with additional council readings, is designed to create a planned unit development district, a special zoning that allows this kind of mixed use, a vibrant project that is going to be able to take shape alongside additional housing, additional retail, and it's so close to the Broadway light rail station right now. That transit connectivity, instead of just acres of parking lots, it's going to be something that is going to build community. And among those voices was Gary Mobell. He was representing the Blue Bonnet restaurant on South Broadway. It's a fun story. I remember going there as a kid all the time with my parents because at the time it was one of the only Mexican restaurants within a 30-minute drive of where we lived. It was our favorite. So we used to go to the Blue Bonnet all the time. And he took the stage, he took the mic, and he was talking about the economic opportunity, consistent foot traffic, reliable business activity, and the kind of a regular rhythm that neighborhood honestly has needed for a while. There's not really anybody that's just walking around like you would in downtown per se. And having that consistent foot traffic is going to be huge for neighborhood institutions. In his words, this project is a strategic investment in economic development, small business, community vitality, and enthusiasm for a local sports team. These are all values that Denver has long championed. And alongside him were other residents of the neighboring communities applauding the community benefits agreement that will deliver over $7 million in investment over the next decade into youth scholarships, athletic programs, housing stability, small business support, workforce development, and so much more. So this isn't just about a stadium. This is a promise that Denver can build infrastructure that doesn't just serve spectators on game day, but supports the heartbeat of neighborhoods every day of the year. We're talking tickets donated to underserved youth, discounted seats for students and seniors, free community meeting spaces, soccer pop-up clinics, apprenticeships, and in-school programs. We're talking art, culture, trees being planted around the site, hiring guarantees for women and minority-owned businesses, and mentoring programs for local entrepreneurs. And I'm saying all this because they're not just buzzwords. These are commitments woven into the very fabric of this project. And even as this project moves forward, it hasn't been without debate. Some council members raised a lot of concerns about public funding mechanisms, tax arrangements, and whether the city dollars should be going towards a private stadium at all. But supporters have emphasized that Denver isn't just buying land. The city is partnering in a venture that celebrates women's sports. It builds new opportunity, and it's activating a part of town that has been waiting far too long for attention. And as we look forward to the Denver Summit's first preseason matches, like those at the 2026 Coachella Valley Invitational and their scheduled season debuts starting in March, the reality is setting in. We're getting closer every day, folks. Denver is building more than the team. It is building history. Now, to really understand what happened in Denver, you have to step inside the locker room of this entire process. And when I say the locker room, I don't just mean the team's locker room. I mean City Hall. I mean neighborhood associations. I mean Santa Fe business owners on South Broadway. I mean longtime residents who have watched Santa Fe Yards sit dormant for 30 years and wondered if anything would ever come of it. And this is where the story gets layered. It gets complicated and it gets a little emotional and honestly very, very Denver. Think about Santa Fe Yards for a second. For a lot of cities, a vacant industrial site near downtown would have been scooped up years ago, whether it was turned into a parking space, storage, or some half-baked development that never really quite fits. But here, at this intersection of I-25 and Santa Fe, that former Gates Rubber Company just sat. A reminder of Denver's industrial past, a reminder of how certain neighborhoods, especially those south of downtown, were often overlooked when big investments were being made elsewhere. So when Denver Summit came forward with this proposal for a purpose-built 14,500 seat stadium, it wasn't just a soccer pitch being dropped onto empty land. It was a collision point between history, growth, and identity. And that's why this process took months. That's why there were heated council meetings, delayed votes, packed chambers, and some sharply worded comments about respect, timing, and transparency. I also want to talk about the community benefits agreement because this is the emotional core of the entire debate. This wasn't a side document. This wasn't a window dressing. This was a line between skepticism and support for a lot of people. After months of negotiations between Denver Summit ownership and groups like West End Neighborhoods United Coalition and the Denver International Neighborhood Cooperation, a legally binding agreement was finalized that commits more than $7 million over the next 10 years directly into the surrounding communities. And that's not just some vague, we'll see what happens kind of commitment. It was very specific. An immediate $400,000 deposit into a community benefits fund, and then at least $300,000 every single year going forward to support projects that the community itself prioritizes. Talk youth scholarships, sports equipment, housing stability, anti-displacement efforts, small business support, workforce recruitment, environmental initiatives. This wasn't about a stadium trying to justify its existence. It was about a team really embedding itself into the neighborhood before a single brick is laid. And as a fan, I tell you this, it's impossible to separate women's soccer from community. That's why I love it so much. The NWSL didn't grow because of billion-dollar TV deals or flashy ownership. It grew because communities adopted teams as reflections of their values: inclusivity, opportunity, visibility. And when Keith Meyer, representing the neighborhood groups, talked about creating unprecedented opportunities in historically under-resourced areas, that wasn't just rhetoric that he was saying. It was recognition of how sports can either extract value from a place or invest deeply in it. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone was immediately on board. In fact, some Denver City Council members were openly critical, and honestly, I want I I think that that's really important. That tension matters. Council members raised alarms about the timing, about being shown the CBA just days before key votes. Words like disrespectful were used. And others questioned whether the city should commit $70 million towards a privately owned stadium, especially when Denver faces real needs around housing, safety, and infrastructure. And this is where nuance comes in. The city's contribution breaks down into $50 million upfront for land acquisition and on-site public improvements, with up to $20 million more potentially allocated for off-site improvements like infrastructure and transportation in future years. That funding from previously rescinded capital improvement funds, not new taxes, not cuts to existing programs, but redirected dollars that were already in the system. And still, opposition voices were very strong. Council member Sarah Parody, for example, framed the deal as a subsidy for a wealthy ownership group, questioning whether this was essentially a rent-free arrangement that prioritized sports over housing or safety. And you know what? Those are very fair questions. They deserve to be asked, because when the city gets a stadium deal wrong, they really get them wrong. But then something interesting happened. Council members who were initially skeptical, even openly opposed to this, they started to shift. So Paul Cashman is the clearest example. He went from calling the proposal a handout to describing it as the city becoming a full partner in a venture that celebrates young women and activates a long ignored part of town. His logic was simple but powerful. If the team succeeds, surrounding neighborhoods benefit for generations. If it fails, well, the city owns improved land near transit that can be repurposed. And I really think that that framing matters, because this wasn't just a bet on soccer, it was a bet on placemaking. And when the votes finally came down, it was a 10-3 approval for the funding, an 11-1 approval for the rezoning of the 6-acre site. And when that happened, applause erupted throughout the chambers. Fans, man, we showed up decked out in our Summit FC gear. We were hugging. People who had spent months in meetings finally could breathe a sigh of relief. And outside City Hall earlier in the day, supporters rallied. We marched. In that imagery of Summit fans getting together and rallying around our team, our exhibition team, I think that is very important, because this wasn't a corporate press release moment. This was a grassroots enthusiasm meeting institutional decision-making. This was women's sports demanding space, physically and culturally, in a city that's grown fast but hasn't always grown equitably. And while all this civic machinery was grinding forward, something else was happening in parallel. The Denver Summit was quietly building momentum as a team, not just as a concept. And for all you local Denver Summit fans, it's great to see this all hitting the news. It's been getting coverage on all the local news stations. And actually, I want to talk about broadcasting for a moment, because this is another puzzle piece that people might be overlooking. So Scripps Sports has become the local television home for the Denver Summit. This is huge, and over-the-air broadcasts matter so much, especially for a new fan base. They matter for kids who stumble upon a game while flipping channels. They matter for households that don't have every streaming service under the sun. Visibility is oxygen for a new club, and this deal signals that the summit isn't just to exist within the margins. So layer that TV deal with the summit's first on-field steps. And while the permanent stadium isn't going to open until early 2028, the summit isn't waiting to introduce itself. The club will play its inaugural home game at Mile High and Power Field at Mile High on March 28th. If you haven't gotten your tickets yet, be sure to get your tickets. And I think that having the very first game at Mile High, it's a symbolic statement that says, we belong on the biggest of stages. And before that, the team will head to the 2026 Coachella Valley Invitational for its first ever preseason match. It's going to be a great opportunity for them to establish identity, style, and their culture long before Santa Fe Yards opens its gates. And this is really important because for expansion teams, identity doesn't start with a stadium and with ribbon cutting. It starts with habits, with how players train, how fans show up, with how leadership communicates values. And from what we've seen so far, Denver Summit is trying to do something rare: align its competitive ambitions with civic responsibility from day one. This stadium is meant to live with the city, not loom over it. And I think that this is why it matters for the NWSL as a whole. For years, women's soccer teams have played in borrowed spaces, temporary homes, or venues designed for someone else's priorities. Purpose-built stadiums are statements on permanence. They say we are not a placeholder, we're not an experiment, we are here to stay. Denver is joining that list. Alongside cities investing real resources into women's sports infrastructure, it pushes the league forward collectively. It raises expectations. It challenges other markets. And it signals to players, sponsors, and fans that this league's future isn't theoretical anymore. And as a fan, I can't help but think about what this will feel like in 10 years. Walking into Santa Fe Yards on a summer evening, seeing kids wear the Summit jerseys they got through the donated ticket program, local art lining the plaza, businesses buzzing because there's a match tonight. That is the vision people were voting on. And we're not even to kickoff yet. Things are getting exciting, folks. It's getting real. We have a home. If you haven't got your Summit gear yet, get your Summit gear. Join the Supporters Club. Because the more we show support for this team, the more we build community around this team before the very first kickoff, it's going to help build that culture that is so needed for expansion teams. We're just getting started, and I'm so excited to be on this ride with you. That's it for this week's episode of the 5280 Pitch Women's Soccer at Altitude. If you have not subscribed yet, be sure to click that subscribe button. Give the show a review, share it with a friend. You can always check us out online at the5280pitch.com to see past episodes and learn a little bit more about your favorite players. But until then, we will see you next week on the 5280 Pitch Women's Soccer at Altitude.